What if the history you learned was only the surface, just the stories they wanted you to hear? Behind every headline from World War II, there were shadows, lives erased, missions buried, and truths too disturbing to make the textbooks. These are not tales of generals and glory. These are secrets whispered between the cracks of history. And once you hear them, you can't unhear them. The winter of 1942 in Karelia was a realm of silence. Snowdrifts swallowed roads and the howling wind erased all signs of movement. But beneath the stillness, a hidden pulse beat, a resistance blooming where no one expected it, among the isolated, frost-bitten villages scattered between the Finnish border and Soviet lines. They called themselves the Snowveil Front. Annikki Saarinen, only 17, had never touched a rifle. Her life, until the war, was one of routine simplicity, herding reindeer, baking rye bread, listening to her grandmother hum old Sami lullabies. But when German troops took control of her village, repurposing its schoolhouse as a radio tower and barracks, Annikki's innocence evaporated with the first crackle of gunfire. Her older brother, Viljo, had vanished into the forest with others who refused occupation. A week later, her father was executed for hiding ammunition in their barn. Her mother didn't speak again for months. Annikki joined the resistance not out of vengeance but out of necessity. She became a messenger. No one suspected the quiet girl with a sled full of firewood, gliding over frozen lakes, to be carrying codes stitched into the lining of her mittens. The codes weren't letters or numbers. They were phrases from lullabies, notes in songs passed through generations. A melody hummed in the right key and tempo at a checkpoint might mean safe to proceed, while another indicated an ambush. The Snowveil Front operated from cave shelters and abandoned lumber mills. Supplies were scarce, so ingenuity replaced weapons. They laid traps with logs and ice, intercepted German convoys using knowledge of local terrain, and jammed radio transmissions with accordion music played off-pitch. Among them were old hunters, school teachers, and defected Soviet scouts, a ragged collection of patriots united by snow and silence. In late January 1943, rumors came of a new German supply route forming north of Lake Ladoga. If completed, it would reinforce the Eastern Front and cut off Soviet resistance in Murmansk. The Snowveil Front had one chance: intercept the construction plans and sabotage the lead convoy. It was Annikki who volunteered to retrieve the plans. The assignment was suicidal. She disguised herself as a cleaner at the German outpost, her forged papers convincing enough due to the Germans' underestimation of Finnish locals. For days, she scrubbed floors and toilets, learning the routine of officers, the timing of transmissions. She heard stories of Operation Citadel, of the coming summer push, and of the desperation tightening in the Wehrmacht's tone. One night, during a snowstorm, she slipped into the radio officer's cabin and found the convoy schedule tucked into a ledger. She burned her hand on the oil lamp as she copied it into the hem of her scarf using pine soot and birch sap. The next morning, she vanished before the base awoke. German patrols hunted her, using dogs and skis. For 3 days, Annikki traversed the tundra with frostbite creeping into her toes and hunger making the trees sway like ghosts. She was found half-conscious by resistance members near the mouth of the Lauhi caves, clutching her scarf like a relic. The information was exact. On February 3, as the German convoy made its way along the frozen ridge south of Kusamo, the Snowveil Front struck. Using sleds rigged with small charges and logs coated in animal fat to make them nearly invisible on the ice, they collapsed the leading vehicles into a ravine. The resulting pileup stalled the entire operation for 6 weeks. By then, Soviet forces had moved in and reclaimed critical ground. Annikki became a symbol. The snow ghost, they called her. Soviet propaganda posters romanticized her story, though she never posed for photographs. She returned to her village only once, to find her mother still staring silently out the window, the schoolhouse burned to cinders. As the war turned, the Snowveil Front continued their sabotage, guiding lost Soviet units through the forest and intercepting Luftwaffe scouts. When Germany finally fell in 1945, most of the Snowveil members scattered into obscurity. Finland's complicated political position meant many were never officially recognized. Annikki moved to Oulu, where she worked in a library, her frostbitten feet hidden beneath long skirts. She rarely spoke of the war. Only in 1989, after her death, did her journals come to light, filled with coded lullabies, sketches of supply routes, and one line repeated dozens of times. Asterisk. Snow remembers everything, even after footsteps fade. Asterisk. The Atlantic Ocean in 1943 was a graveyard. Merchant vessels groaned and splintered beneath the weight of torpedoes, oil fires stained the waves, and beneath the surface, steel predators prowled, German U-boats, silent and relentless. Among them, one name whispered through the Allied command like a ghost story: U-666. Officially, U-666 was just another Type WWII submarine deployed to terrorize Allied supply lines between America and Britain. But something about this one was different. It didn't show up on sonar. It never transmitted the usual Kriegsmarine codes. Its attacks were precise, always vanishing before the Royal Navy could respond. Some sailors believed it was cursed. Others thought it didn't exist at all. In London, Naval Intelligence launched a classified investigation under the codename Operation Foghook. Commander Evelyn Carr, a skeptic with a background in cryptography and a reputation for uncovering hoaxes, was assigned to lead it. She was given files with maps marked in red circles, convoy manifests, eyewitness accounts, and one grainy photograph taken from a destroyed freighter showing what appeared to be the silhouette of a U-boat, marked 666. Carr didn't believe in phantoms. She believed in patterns. And U-666 had won. It never sank passenger ships, only those carrying fuel, munitions, or military cargo. Survivors always spoke of seeing the torpedo coming, deliberately fired in such a way as to allow evacuation. More strangely, some survivors swore they saw flares, red, not white, warning of an incoming strike. One account, from an American Navy lieutenant, described seeing a man through his binoculars after a torpedo struck their tanker. The man stood on the deck of the U-boat and saluted them before diving beneath the waves. Commander Carr, curious, traced the ship logs and confirmed that this pattern began in mid-1942, shortly after the disappearance of a German captain named Kurt Morgenstern. Morgenstern was once considered a rising star in the Kriegsmarine, a decorated officer who openly questioned the morality of unrestricted submarine warfare. He vanished during his last mission in the North Atlantic, declared lost with all hands. But Carr believed he had gone rogue. Using decoded Enigma messages, Carr tracked irregular radio transmissions from the Azores, signals that mimicked commercial frequencies but were off by just a single hertz. In that narrow bandwidth, she discovered repeating phrases, fragments of English interspersed with Morse code. When decrypted, they formed what looked like warnings: Convoy 15 at risk, U-247 eastbound, weatherstorm window 48 hours. They weren't enemy messages. They were tips. Someone aboard U-666 was feeding the Allies information. Carr pushed for a coordinated response. A decoy convoy was formed and sent toward one of the expected U-666 routes. She boarded HMS Foxhound herself, hiding in a supply crate to avoid suspicion, her only weapon a shortwave receiver tuned to the phantom signal. 4 days. Nothing. The ocean stretched infinite and unbroken. Then, at dawn on the 4th day, a torpedo exploded near their port side, a warning shot. A flare arced into the air. Red. Not hostile. Communicative. Moments later, the receiver crackled. Storm ends. North wind silent. Carr, breathless, tapped out a reply. No answer. Minutes passed, then hours. The Foxhound scoured the area but found nothing. No periscope, no hull, no wake. U-666 was gone. After that, the transmissions stopped. No more sightings. No more flares. Carr returned to London with her report, but MI6 shelved it, claiming insufficient evidence. The war raged on, and U-666 faded into myth. In 1958, decades later, a fishing trawler off the coast of Iceland dragged up a rusted steel hatch. Inside was a waterproof canister containing a torn Kriegsmarine logbook. The last entry, dated March 10, 1943, was written in English. I cannot serve a madness. I will not become what they are. If I must sink, I will sink alone, not in blood. K.M. Commander Carr, then retired, read the entry in silence. She never commented publicly, but in her private memoirs, published after her death in 1984, she wrote only this under the heading U-666. The sea holds secrets it will never give up. But sometimes, it lets you glimpse one, like a face in the fog, just long enough to believe. In the hollow heart of northern Germany, beyond the barbed wire and watchtowers, lay Bergen-Belsen, a concentration camp where death came not with bullets, but with silence, starvation, and sickness. By 1944, it had become a purgatory, a final stop for Jews, political prisoners, and the so-called undesirables of the Reich. Among them was Dr. Lenka Horowitz-Sova, a botanist from Prague who had once lectured at Charles University on the healing power of native plants. She arrived at Bergen-Belsen in the winter of 1944 with her hair already shorn and her fingers raw from weeks spent digging graves at their Theresienstadt. She was 34, too weak for hard labor, and too educated to be trusted. She was assigned to Barrack 18, a holding block for women deemed unfit for transport but not yet scheduled for extermination. Disease ruled Bergen-Belsen. Typhus ran rampant, worsened by malnutrition, overcrowding, and human filth. Every hour, someone died. The SS barely bothered with order. The guards, fearing infection, rarely entered the blocks, and even the dogs grew thin. Death had become so common it no longer needed a uniform. But Lenka survived. She survived because she watched. She remembered. Through the cracks in the walls and during forced marches outside the camp's perimeter, she noticed the plants that still dared to grow along the forest's edge. Yarrow, plantain, chickweed. She recognized them from the field books she once taught from. Her memory, once filled with Latin names and illustrations, became her only library. At night, she scratched diagrams into the dirt beneath her cot with a broken spoon. She whispered to the sick, asking about their symptoms, their pains, their dreams. Most thought she was mad, a woman who spoke to the dead and pretended that flowers could fight fever. But then she began to treat them. Using thread from unraveled blankets and boiled roots hidden in her pockets, she brewed primitive teas. She collected nettles and mixed them with mold scraped from the corners of latrines, an accidental form of penicillin. Her most daring act was stealing onion skins from the kitchen trash, which she combined with moss to reduce infection in wounds. She didn't cure the camp. She couldn't. But people stopped dying quite as fast. She wrote everything down on scraps of paper, bits of cloth, even the inside of a tin food lid. Her handwriting shrank as the months passed, as her fingers cracked and her vision blurred. Still, she documented every dosage, every failure, every unexpected recovery. Lenka shared her knowledge with others, a Polish midwife named Helena, a French nurse named Margot, and a Russian teacher who helped memorize the findings when paper ran out. They called themselves the Circle. In secret, they hummed Czech lullabies as codes to signal which herbs to collect. To outsiders, they were just whispering nonsense. To those within, they were practicing resistance. One day in March 1945, an SS doctor, drunk and angry, discovered the tin containing Lenka's notes. He accused her of witchcraft and sabotage. She was dragged to the courtyard, made to kneel. Prisoners were forced to watch. But before he could execute her, she smiled. She said only one sentence, even weeds bloom in blood. The doctor hesitated. Then he struck her with his pistol and walked away. She was never seen again. 3 weeks later, British troops liberated Bergen-Belsen. What they found was beyond comprehension: 10,000 unburied corpses, thousands of sick and dying. But among the survivors was Margot, the French nurse, clutching a steel tea box wrapped in a blood-stained apron. Inside were Lenka's notes. The contents were rushed to a British field hospital, where medical officers confirmed several of the remedies had measurable antibacterial properties. The journal, painstakingly preserved, contained not only botanical observations but names, hundreds of them, of prisoners Lenka had treated, their conditions, and their fates. The British captain who received the journal wept as he read the final page. It was a drawing, a simple line sketch of a flowering plant pushing up through a skull. The journal became known as Leaves from the Ashes and was sent to Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, where it remains on display in a glass case. Scientists and historians still study its contents, not for new medicine, but for proof that humanity, even crushed beneath tyranny, found ways to bloom. Lenka Horowitzowska's name is etched into a plaque beneath an oak tree planted outside the Bergen-Belsen Memorial. Every spring, wild yarrow and nettle sprout near its base. People say if you listen closely, you can hear the rustling leaves whispering lullabies. On the southern coast of Kyushu, where the hills of Nagasaki descend into shimmering blue waters, there once lived a man who nearly changed the course of his nation's fate. Not with a sword, not with a bomb, but with ink. Lieutenant Haruto Ishikawa was 26 when he was selected for Japan's elite kamikaze program in the spring of 1945. A decorated pilot, Haruto had flown reconnaissance over the Philippines and survived 3 dogfights. His loyalty to the empire was unquestioned, his discipline unmatched. But inside his regulation flight bag, tucked beneath his maps and orders, was a leather-bound notebook that held a different kind of battle. It was his diary. Haruto began writing in the diary after the firebombing of Tokyo in March 1945. His cousin, a schoolteacher, had died in the blaze. Her name, Misaki, was the first word in his opening entry. He described the fire as a living creature. It howled like wolves, feeding on wood, flesh, and silence. That night, something inside Haruto cracked. Though he continued to salute, to fly, to chant the slogans of death before surrender, his pen revealed another man. One who questioned the path his country had taken. One who feared not for his life, but for his soul. When he was transferred to Omura Air Base near Nagasaki, Haruto was placed on a final list, men scheduled for honorable sacrifice. He was to fly a Zero fighter, loaded with 550 pounds of explosives, into an American battleship off Okinawa. His mission date was August 10, 1945. The night before, he wrote, "I do not fear dying. I fear dying wrongly. I fear that we no longer know what right is." But fate would intervene. On August 9th, the sky over Nagasaki was torn apart by something no man could have prepared for. The second atomic bomb, codenamed Fat Man, was dropped just a few kilometers from the base. The world turned white, then red, then black. The shockwave shattered windows, crushed buildings, and ruptured the very earth. Haruto survived only because he had been flying a test loop 30 miles east when the bomb hit. From his altitude, he saw the cloud rise, towering like a god. He didn't speak for 3 days. When he returned to the base, he found silence. The control tower was rubble. His squadron commander was dead. The field hospital overflowed with soldiers whose skin peeled like paper. There were no orders. No radio. Just the sound of wind moving through broken glass. He could have left, escaped into the hills or vanished among the civilian refugees. Instead, Haruto did something unexpected. He stayed. And he wrote. His diary became a record of what he saw in those final days of the war. The bodies pulled from rivers, the hollowed-out stare of mothers who had no one left to cradle, the craters in the earth still hot to the touch. He described the silence of the birds, the taste of ash in every sip of water. But amid the horror, he found one small, improbable thing: hope. Hidden in a collapsed schoolhouse near the edge of the blast zone, Haruto discovered a wounded American nurse, Lieutenant Sarah Monroe. She had been a prisoner of war, captured in the Philippines, moved from one internment camp to another, finally ending up in Nagasaki as a Red Cross translator. When the bomb fell, she was underground, treating another prisoner. The blast sealed her in, but not completely. Haruto pulled her out with his bare hands. She didn't speak Japanese, and he didn't speak much English. But they shared pain, shared water, shared silence. Over the course of a week, he tended to her injuries using cloth torn from his own uniform and herbs gathered from the hills. In the evenings, They sat under the broken torii gate near the base and watched the red sun bleed across the sky. He wrote in his diary, **, she does not hate me. That is the most unbearable part. I do not deserve to be forgiven. **. On August 15th, the radio finally spoke again. Emperor Hirohito's voice crackled over the static, announcing Japan's surrender. Haruto fell to his knees, not in despair, but in something else. He wasn't sure if it was relief or guilt. 3 days later, he gave the last entry to Sarah, sealed in the leather cover. He told her, in slow, broken English, "You live. You tell truth." Then he walked into the forest and disappeared. Sarah survived. She was rescued by U.S. forces on August 22 and returned to California, where she recovered from her wounds and became a nurse for veterans. 4 years, she kept the diary in a drawer, too haunted to open it. It wasn't until 1970, when her son asked about the war for a school project, that she finally translated it. The diary caused a sensation in academic circles. It was unlike any wartime document ever recovered, a kamikaze who not only turned away from his mission, but saved an enemy. A man who bore witness to the dawn of a nuclear age and chose healing over hate. The diary was published under the title Sky No Longer Blue. In Japan, it sparked national debate. Some saw Haruto as a traitor. Others saw him as a prophet. In 2001, Sarah returned to Nagasaki with her grandson and placed the original diary beneath the torii gate where she and Haruto once sat. The city had rebuilt around it. A small plaque nearby bears his name, and beneath it, the words from his final entry. *, "The sun rises on the ruins, still. Let it rise also in our hearts." In the shadowed alleys of London, amidst the nightly sirens and falling bombs, a man named Elliot Crane practiced deception not as survival, but as art. Before the war, Crane was a stage magician, one of the best. He'd once made a double-decker bus disappear in front of a live audience in Soho. Critics called him the Gentleman of Smoke. He vanished watches, conjured birds from ink bottles, and once escaped a sealed coffin underwater. But as the world slid into war, Crane's theater emptied. Entertainment was replaced with enlistment, and illusions gave way to bloodshed. It wasn't long before British intelligence came calling. In 1943, MI6 was tasked with building a deception operation to mislead the Germans about the location of the upcoming Allied invasion of France. They needed the enemy to believe the invasion would strike at Calais, not Normandy. To achieve this, they envisioned a campaign of false radio transmissions, double agents, and perhaps most critically, visual deception. That's when they found Elliot Crane. Operation Foxglass, a name derived from the special mirror tents used in theatrical illusions, was born. Its mission, to stage a false army. A force that didn't exist, but would appear real from the air, from spy reports, and from German aerial photographs. Crane's stage became the southern coast of England. With a team of engineers, painters, and a few fellow magicians he recruited from abandoned vaudeville acts, Crane began building an army of ghosts. They constructed inflatable tanks that could be deflated and moved in minutes, wooden aircraft painted with shadows to mimic metal sheen, and entire motor pools created from tarps and scaffolding. Soldiers marched with empty rifles in circles, changing uniforms between patrols to simulate larger numbers. They even built fake ship docks, nothing more than wood and paint, and used mirrors angled just so to reflect distant real activity onto German reconnaissance cameras. The Luftwaffe, flying high above the clouds, took photographs that confirmed their worst fear, a massive Allied presence gathering at Dover, ready to cross to Calais. But Crane's masterpiece came in the form of light. Using carefully timed ghost lights, arrays of rotating mirrors and lanterns, he created the illusion of constant night convoys. When seen from German planes or observed by enemy agents, these lights mimicked the movement of thousands of trucks and tanks under blackout conditions. German analysts, unaware of the sleight of hand, charted an entire armored division that never existed. Crane coordinated these illusions from a makeshift command post in an abandoned opera house near Canterbury. Every movement was mapped like a scene in a play. He wore a waistcoat under his uniform, carried a silver pocket watch, and referred to German intelligence as the audience. But deception is a fragile art. In May 1944, a known German agent operating under the name Rudiger managed to get dangerously close to Foxglass's staging area. If Rudiger discovered the ruse, the entire D-Day plan could unravel. Crane took matters into his own hands. Disguised as a janitor, he lured Rudiger into one of the false barracks. Inside, everything was staged: fake mess kits, rubber rifles, even staged arguments among officers, played by MI6 actors. Crane walked Rudiger through the set himself, playing the part of an irritable cleaner with a limp and a grudge. He muttered about too many tanks, and blasted Yanks drinking all the tea. Rudiger swallowed it whole. When the spy returned to his handlers, he reported exactly what Crane intended. Allied invasion plans focused on Calais. Days later, German High Command reinforced their Atlantic Wall at Calais, pulling troops from Normandy just weeks before D-Day. On June 6, 1944, as Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, the Germans were still watching the Dover coast, expecting another wave that never came. Crane listened to the radio in silence, sitting in the wings of the old opera house. When the BBC confirmed the landing was successful, he lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. His illusion had held. After the war, Operation Foxglass remained classified for decades. Crane returned to his theater, but he never performed again. Instead, he taught at a small art school in Devon, instructing students not in magic, but in visual truth. Only in 1992 did the British government declassify the full details of Operation Foxglass. The files included photographs of the inflatable tanks, the mirror arrays, and sketches drawn in Crane's own hand, blueprints of deception crafted with a showman's precision. His most famous note, scribbled in red ink on the back of a prop invoice, read, "**, the greatest illusions are not the ones we see, but the ones we never question. **. Today, in a small museum near Dover, one of Crane's inflatable tanks sits deflated and folded beside his old stage wand and waistcoat. Visitors rarely understand what they're looking at. But if you stand just right, in the corner mirror, Crane's last surviving ghost light, you might glimpse something that isn't really there. You've just heard what they tried to forget, stories smothered by silence, edited from the pages of history. But now they're out. And maybe that truth is more dangerous than the lies. Because once a secret escapes, it never truly goes back in the box.